Well, these are 4 topics I'd like to talk about. I'm going to talk a little about defense mechanisms and maladaptive responses to climate change, some figures on climate change denial and the Spanish society. Then I'd like to present you a few examples of tools and messages used by the climate change counter movement in Spain. And finally, I'd like to present you 4 different proposals coming from all over the world on how to treat denialism in the communication field. Well, first, well, these are 4 classical kinds of denialism that are discussed and described in papers usually. In papers on denialism, they used to describe, for example, trend skeptics, that are people who is not sure or who think climate change is not happening. If you want to know how many trend skeptics you have in your country or in your community, you should ask something like this: is it happening? Is it real? You have also attribution skeptics, people who think maybe climate change is not human-made but natural. You have impact skeptics, people who don't think climate change is dangerous, for example. Even sometimes they think it is good for us, like this last Donald Trump's idea on how good global warming could be for some regions in America. And you have also implication skeptics, that people who don't know if we should do something, we should wait and see. These are different categories. Okay. Well, what's happening in Spain? We have been making a few surveys on public opinion and climate change in 2008, 2010, 2012. And these are some figures taken from these surveys. As you can see, if you ask in Spain, do you think climate change is happening? Nearly 9 out of 10 respondents think climate change is happening, and only 4.6% believed in 2012 climate change is not happening. And if you ask, do you think, is it caused by natural causes, human causes? Well, about 2/3 of people surveyed in 2012 believed that climate change is caused mainly or exclusively by human causes. Only 8.4% believed it is primarily or exclusively due to natural causes. So here you can have first figures that maybe make us think that denialism is not very important in Spain. Is it dangerous? Well, here you have a slightly different situation, but still 9 out of 10 respondents think it's going to affect a moderate amount or even a great deal to poor countries, to future generations. 7 out of 10 think it's going to affect the Spanish society or even your community. 6 out of 10 to your family, to you personally. You can see that still huge majorities think climate change is dangerous. But here you can find an interesting effect. When you put the focus closer to your own situation, there are more and more persons that think it's not so dangerous. So we should say, yes, it's going to happen, but not to me. That's the way of thinking. The psychologists call it exceptionalist thinking. Finally, what should we do? Well, here you have 6 statements. The first statements are used usually to express or you should do nothing at all, or to back in action, let's say. Sorry, because I didn't find this graph in English, but first one says Spaniards should do nothing. Only 4.1 is agree with this statement. It is the same what people do in Spain, only 17%, 18% really. This statement is more ambiguous, the situation. Spaniards should worry for more important problems. Here, nearly half of the population agree with this statement. But then we have the three statements we have used to analyze if people is backing responses to climate change. Spaniards should anticipate to the possible consequences, should foster the use of efficient technologies, should reduce our energy consumption. As you can see, nearly, 18, 90% of respondents agree with these statements. So what can we see if we put together all these figures? The Spanish society does not respond to the classical profiles of denialism that are usually the object of research. But what is the real Spanish problem is salience. The salience of climate change in Spain, the society, the salience in society, salience in policy, salience in media is really very, very low. We have made a lot of questions in these studies, but I think this graph taken from Google Trends is a good summary of the situation. You here can compare how many people is searching for Cristiano Ronaldo, a famous Spanish football player, if you don't know him, and yeah.
We still share this planet, though. I do know who Cristiano Ronaldo is.
You know it's Cristiano Ronaldo. And then searches on climate change. In June 2017, the score was Cristiano Ronaldo 92, climate change 2. So the problem is that the pool of our worries is finite, and if you don't keep in mind a problem just at the top of your priorities, in practical terms, it doesn't exist. The problem in Spain is not we don't have beliefs that are close to the scientific interpretation of climate change. We have, as you have seen. The problem is that the salience of the problem is very, very low. So in practical terms, we live as if climate change didn't exist at all. So how to explain a little this difference between, for example, USA and Spain? One of the differences is about the relationship between beliefs and political position. In Spain, we have a very, very weak relation with most of these kinds of negation, of denialism we have seen before. Is it happening? You know, the p-value is really, really very weak when you look at the political position and the idea about if it's real or not. When you look at the attribution of causes, it's just the same. And if you go to the implications, to recognition of implications, to what should you do, there is no relation at all. Only the relationship between political position and beliefs is important if you go and look for the evaluation of risk. The evaluation of risks coming from climate change is much higher when you ask to persons that are on the left side of the political spectrum than when you ask to center or right. But, well, here there's another a table that really says the same thing. You know, for example, I believe climate change is happening. More than 9 out of 10 persons that position themselves in the right think it's true. Or I believe it's due to human causes. So the gap is not very big here in Spain. How can we explain this difference? We have very weak political politicization, and also our beliefs are quite close to those of the scientists that work on climate change. Well, I think we have at least 6 possible drivers, 6 possible factors explaining the situation. First one is that in the Spanish context, the denial of the existence of climate change and its human causality has not been adopted as an identity marker by conservative parties. This is, you can think, okay, this is a good news, yes, but what is the reason? The reason is the second point, the low salience of climate change. Really, it's so unimportant that it's not even taken into account as an identity marker. Also, in Spain, deniers have a discrete public activity, and consequently, center and right people are, let's say, more vulnerable to the scientific discourse and to the dominant social perception. Parties also don't have a great possibility to influence important beliefs because citizen trust in political parties in Spain is quite low. And two more possible explanations. Inside of the conservative sphere, only the ultra-liberal orientation media have maintained a clearly denier stance. And this kind of media or this kind of ideology is not very strong in our case. And finally, Spain hasn't got fossil fuels. Our climate change policy is not very aggressive. And so adopting the scientific perspective is quite easy. It's cheap, let's say. That's important to take, it's important to take this into account because we should ask ourselves, what is it going to happen when the climate policy, if the climate policy becomes more aggressive? Because it's thought is, for sure, if we want to change from a carbon-based economy to a decarbonized economy, as Max was saying before, the climate change policies need to become more aggressive. Then adopting the scientific perspective won't be so painless, so easy. So I think this is important to take it in mind because the current situation maybe won't be the situation in future. I'm going back to this slide. Yeah, this is a list of defense mechanisms when you are confronted to climate change information that was made by Susan Moser a few years ago. And it's interesting because the denial of the existence of the threat, for example, is just one defense mechanism, but we have others. For example, the belief that the problem won't happen here or to us. You have seen in the graphs that it is operating very, very strong in Spain. The projection of the responsibility onto someone else, for example, by blaming others for the problem or by attributing the responsibility to solve it to experts. Of course, we have wishful thinking. That's the rationalization that the problem will go away by its own, it's less severe than believed, or that silver bullet solutions will be found. We have also tradition, that's an important base. For sure, you have heard someone saying, we've always done it this way. When you want to change something, you go to tradition, you find in tradition a backstone. What we call the uncertainty trap is also very important. We could sum up this by saying we don't yet know enough to act. We'll better wait and see, these sort of things. And still we have two more defense mechanisms that are quite important when confronted to climate change information. Displacement of attention to other issues, that's a common strategy of denialism, for example, or even fatalism, that thoughts like there's nothing to be done, it has no solutions, it is too late, these sort of things. And it's important to take into account, and now we are going to see it, that the organized denialism takes into account all these defense mechanisms and try to feed them by communication strategies. And now I am going to. So I like just a few examples taken from Spain. These are some of the favorite, let's say, lines of work in Spain of the climate change counter movement. If you look at the communication field, casting doubts on causes, this is a classical strategy that was very, very heavily used in the United States. But in Spain, we are very good fostering techno-optimism, trying to mainstream contradictions. We'll see what does it mean. Boycotting climate change campaigns, normalizing energy waste, and promoting tricky solutions. Just fast examples. This is a feature that was downloaded just a few days ago from the web page of one of the main Spanish petrol companies, Cepsa. Well, it's not Spanish anymore, but it's important in Spain. And when saying what is the cause of climate change, they have a first paragraph saying that there is a general consensus in the scientific world that climate change is caused by human activity. And then they add a second paragraph saying other scientific theories consider climate change as a result of action by oceans and atmosphere as drivers of change of climate and variable intensity of sun. So they just open the door to another alternative explanation, and that's enough. They don't need more. But in the communication field, maybe the main tool is advertising. This is an advertising campaign. It's from 2012, I think, by the main fossil fuel company in Spain, Repsol. And the slogan, the main slogan was, "Let's invent the future." And it said something like, "We invented the wheel, we discovered fire, we arrived at the moon, we made bread, we invented the printer, hacks, and even Peter Pan." If we have been able of all that, how aren't we going to be able to protect that, what we care most, or something like that? So this is fostering eco-optimism. They don't speak about climate change. Climate change is never there. Never, the words are never there, but they are talking about climate change, it's clear. And they are fostering techno-optimisms. They are trying to tell you that, of course, we are going to solve it. Don't worry about it. Someone will fix it. Mainstreaming contradictions. What is this is a very, very, this is, I think it's from this year. This was broadcasted in maybe January or something like that. What is the current situation? We are starting trying to make a transition to low carbon economy, and then what happens? That traditions emerge. So what do companies do? This sort of advertising. it's a man happy in his new Audi car, saying, the voice of the speaker says, there is nothing better than walking. And then Audi A3, adrenaline, what a name, enjoy contradictions. So as they know contradictions are going to be increasingly important and can be a way of changing your options, because if you find a contradiction exists, then you try to solve them. Then they try to normalize contradictions, saying, okay, enjoy contradictions. Of course, you have these classical lines like promoting tricky solutions. No? Now, a fossil fuel is presented as, this is very recent as well, as the solution to curb climate change. This is the Association of Natural Gas Sellers in Spain. And finally, this is real direct boycott to the climate change campaigns. This is a whole page in the main Spanish newspaper, El País, that was published just the day after the car-free day, 23rd of September. One day without my car, don't even think about it. So sometimes when the climate change, with communication to change the way things are done, how you go to school, how you spend your money, and so on. When these campaigns are supposed to be working, they use this sort of resources to try to stop them. This is a good mother because she goes with her children and she protects them by going to school with them, of course with your nice car. Well, Silver Valdez Solutions, this is also a classic kind of pieces of information you can find in. And then just to finish, I'd like to present you 4 proposals. Maybe in the debate we could discuss if they are interesting for our case or not. 4 proposals on how to tackle climate change denialism from the perspective of communication. First proposal. They are proposals coming from all over the world. Forget the climate change detractors. This Futerra, for example, a company specialized on sustainable communication, made a report for the British government called The Rules of the Game, Principles of Climate Change Communication. And they said, those who deny climate change science are irritating but unimportant. The argument is not about if we should deal with climate change, but how we should deal with climate change. So the proposal by Futerra is, okay, forget them, because if you take them into account, you are going to improve their impact. Another proposal, exposing its tactics. This comes from a paper made called Denialism, What is it and how scientists should respond. And here it says, it is necessary to shift the debate from the subject under consideration, instead exposing to public scrutiny the tactics they employ and identify them publicly for what they are. This is another suggestion. These persons, these scientists, in this article, in this paper, they define what are the main denialist strategies identification of conspiracies, use of fake experts, selectivity in the use of the sources of information, creation of impossible expectations, use of misrepresentations and logical fallacies. And what they propose is you should focus on not on what they are trying to communicate, but on how they are doing it and what are the problems of these strategies. Third proposal, debunking myths. But this is a famous little piece of work, the debunking handbook made by John Cook and Stefan Lewandowski. But they are quite cautious about this line of work. They say debunking myths is problematic. Unless great care is taken, any effort to debunk misinformation can inadvertently reinforce the very myths one seeks to correct. So they give some advices on how you can debunk a myth that is being communicated by the denialist side. And the fourth and last slide, of course, this is also a classical line of work, uncover the sponsors. We could say also follow the money. Big enterprises claiming corporate social responsibility are funding the climate change counter movement. We know that because of the work of Max and others. And at the same time, they are they are trying to have an image of people that is sensible, that is looking for the common good, this sort of thing. So uncover the sponsors is also a way to debunk, in this case, all the system of funding of these groups. Well, I think I finish here, and then we'll have time, I hope, for discussing.